Hello interwebs and welcome to my channel. So for today's video, I want to do a further discussion on JK Rowling and discuss what I think is probably one of the most dangerous and insidious things about this whole situation with JK Rowling and why I actually think that she might be doing a lot of harm more than most people think she is. And that is the fact that I believe from what I can glean from her tweets and writings and things like that JK Rowling, in her heart of hearts, actually does truly believe that she is doing the right thing and the kind thing for women in general, and, surprisingly, trans people. You see, with JK Rowling, I don't really think she is sitting there going, screw trans people. I hate them. They're awful. And I actually think she states this in her essay that she wrote several weeks ago or a month or so ago at this point, where she stated in that essay, I'm paraphrasing here because I don't have the essay in front of me, but she basically paraphrased, like, I do care about trans people. I do understand their plight. I do understand that they go through things like facing misogyny and assault and sexual harassment and things like that. So I do think, in her heart of hearts, that she actually believes what she is stating, and that actually believes that what she's saying is helpful to not just women, but trans people in general. Because, you see, that is the problem with TERF ideology as a whole. It sounds incredibly, incredibly reasonable to a lot of people when they just see it on their face. For example, if, some Republican, politician or some bigot who hates trans people comes up and says, I hate trans people, they're awful, they're the worst things, I hate them, get those trannies out of here. That's easy to break down. That's easy to be like, he hates trans people. I could easily sit here and just rattle off a billion reasons why that guy is a transphobe. Makes perfect sense. But when it comes to TERF ideology, even I, as someone who has read a lot of TERF ideology, has tried to understand where it comes from, try to break it down, I spend a lot of my time, for fun, kind of, doing the work to try to understand where this ideology comes from and where the breakdown in logic begins. And the problem is, that is very hard to explain. Again, even as someone who studies this fairly regularly. It is a very difficult topic to break down. And so when someone comes into, this discussion who isn't trans, number one, and number two, does not have the wealth of research and knowledge and time that, someone like I or other trans people or people who are up to date on this topic knows, they sort of come to this thing and sort of look at JK Rowling's essay, look at JK Rowling's words and say, yeah, that makes sense. Things like she says, women and trans women are different. Yeah. That makes sense. I even, as a trans person, I agree with that statement. Cis women and trans women are different. And I believe, to a degree, this is actually how JK Rowling herself fell down this rabbit hole. She found different TERFs and people spreading this ideology, and she started to follow them and listen to their talking points. Hearing things that sound reasonable, buy into this idea that trans women and cis women are different, we all agree on that, and that sex is a thing, again, we all agree on that. But the false premise that TERFs then go from is that, oh, well, trans women and cis women are different, trans women are not women. And they are, by stating that they are hurting women's spaces. Because they, X, Y, and Z. They go into, they ignore science, they limit women's speech. But once you buy into that premise, that trans women and cis women are different, again, something we all agree on, but then trans women are not women. Once you buy into that idea, the entire unraveling of logic that she follows makes sense based on that false premise. There's a whole bunch of science and different things that break that down, but it's also really hard to argue that point because it is, to a degree, a philosophical one. But one that does have backing in science, or at least if you accept that, it does the most good for the most people. If you accept that trans women are women, it helps women, cis women or not, and it helps trans women, it helps the most amount of people. But if you buy that premise, you can follow all the rest of TERF ideology to a large extent. And the thing that really even pushed her further, not just this ideology sounding intriguing on its face, is the fact that a lot of people were abusing JK Rowling. Sending her, they saw that she followed these people, so they sent her harassment, called her TERF, things like that. All these things that would push her back into her own, being like, people are calling me TERFs, people are harassing me. The people who aren't harassing me are the TERFs, the so-called TERFs, the people who are saying these logical sounding things. And I'm not putting that on anybody. I'm not saying that it's a bad thing to call her a TERF. JK Rowling is a TERF. That's just, especially right now, that is true. That is a descriptive term. But I also wonder, when we call her a TERF, when we attack her, when we do these things, I wonder what our goal is. Because I totally and completely understand people being hurt. I was hurt. I did a whole video angrily and breaking down all the problems with her essays, and that's something I still fully stand behind 100%. So I understand the emotional gut reaction of being angry at her and being angry at someone in a position of power using her platform to hurt trans people in general. But I also realize that if we keep pushing her, she just gets reaffirmed in her belief, in her viewpoint. And again, I don't think she's a bad person. At least I don't think that she morally views herself as a bad person. It's the same thing with like racists. No, 99% of racists do not think that they are racists. But they do hold racist values and beliefs and push racist ideas and vote for racist politicians and laws and legislation. But no one would say I'm a racist. No one is that self-aware, I guess. Very few people are. So it brings this interesting question is like, how do we have this conversation in a way that feels constructive? And also asking the question, is it even possible to have this conversation in a way that feels constructive? I, as a trans person, the thing that I like to do is educate about these issues. That's the work that I like to do. I like to be an educator about myself and my community as best as I can without trying to overspeak for other members of my community. But not every trans person should have to do that work. Like, I would be willing to sit down with JK Rowling and have a conversation with her. But not every trans person should have to do that work. And every trans people should be able to protect themselves. When someone in a position of power like JK Rowling hurts them and so directly harms their community, we should be able to protect ourselves and push back against that and hold her accountable. But if we do push back against her, it just pushes her into her own beliefs. So it's like, how do we have that constructive conversation? And JK Rowling recently, along with many other people, came out in a video, wrote a letter that's signed about cancel culture and the problems with cancel culture. And while I disagree with the idea that, JK Rowling is in any way canceled, the very fact that she was able to publish a letter like that, along with many other big names, shows that she has not been canceled in any way, nor has her free speech in any way been infringed upon. She is still very powerful. People still listen to her. She can say whatever she wants on any platform that she wants. And by the way, also, even if she were canceled, that does not ruin her free speech. You are allowed to say anything that you want, but that does not mean you get access to a platform, nor that people have to listen to you, nor that you are removed from being critiqued. All of us, that's when I hate these free speech arguments. But regardless, she has not been canceled. And even if, whatever canceling she's faced has not been in any way effective in any majority sort of way. But to a degree, I do understand a kernel of her point, in the sense that, cancel culture just removes any ability for us to have a nuanced conversation, for us to try to have a conversation. And I don't want to say meet in the middle. I don't want to say compromise, because there are things that when I have these conversations, there are certain things that I will never compromise. I will never compromise that trans women are women. I will never compromise certain core values that I believe are needed to be upheld. And I will never try and meet in the middle. That's the problem that we let a lot of politicians get into. It's like, well, we need to compromise, we need to meet in the middle, but meeting in the middle with a fascist means that you're meeting in something still horrible. So you can still hold firm to your values, but there's a way to hold firm to your values and still try to have a conversation and try to bring people to the other side. The thing I always try to do is try to empathize with the other side. So whenever I make a video that's trying to talk about these issues and educate about the trans community, I try and put myself in, who's someone who is smart, well-meaning, but maybe not educated, or may even be slightly hostile to trans people. How do I get that person from there to bring them to where I am? How do I get from there to here? And that's a hard thing to do sometimes. It's a hard thing to ask anybody to do, and not everybody should have to do it, as I said before. But if it's the work that you want to be in, if that's how you want to, change the world, and again, I have the privilege and platform to be able to do that, in someone who is probably not going to be hurt because I live in a fairly trans-affirming area, I have the ability to have that conversation. But there's also this danger of knowing when that's not possible. There are some people that you cannot change. And I think JK Rowling probably could be, if someone like Eddie Redmayne or Emma Watson or Daniel Radcliffe were able to actually sit down and have a conversation with her, an honest conversation where mistakes are willing to be made and wrong things are able to be said in an effort to educate about why they're wrong. I think that she could be changed. I don't know if she ever will, because I don't know if her discourse will allow for that. Unless, again, like someone like Daniel Radcliffe goes and sits her down and actually has the conversation. Someone that she already trusts. But no one online is going to change her mind. But I think she could have her mind changed. But then you get someone like, Trump. You're never going to change his mind. He's too far gone. Even though I doubt Trump himself would even call himself a racist. I don't even think in his head he thinks he's a racist. Or even is self-aware in that sense. But I don't think there's any way I could ever have a conversation, even with that thought process of ever getting Trump to get to our side. To understand the problems that he has caused and the harm he has done. I just don't think that that's possible. So it's, those are two extreme examples, JK Rowling versus Trump, but they sort of elucidate the point of like knowing when the difference is and what is possible and what is not. And trying to figure out how to have a nuanced conversation in a culture that sadly does not allow for nuance. I see it in like stupid things like Star Trek. Star Trek Discovery is either the worst Star Trek show ever made or the best. There's no in between. Even though my view is, it's kind of in between. I don't think it's the worst, I don't think it's the best. But culture, internet culture specifically, does not allow for that. In-person culture is an entirely different thing. But we all live on the internet now, don't we? So yeah, that's sort of what I wanted to kind of roll over in my mind. I don't have any clear points on it. There's no clear answer on it. If I had an answer, I would just give it to you. But I don't have one. But it is the biggest problem here. How do we have a nuanced conversation in a world that does not allow nuance, and with people who see themselves as being more the victim than those they are victimizing? Like JK Rowling. She sees herself as the victim in all of this. If you read all of her essays, she sees herself as the victim. And I'm not saying she hasn't been harassed. I'm not saying she hasn't been hurt. I'm not saying she hasn't been abused, both in her personal life and by people online. Those are two different things. I'm not equating them necessarily, but they are abuse. So she has been a victim in some way, but she's not aware of the victimization she's done to other people. And not self-aware enough to hit that point. And not aware that the harm that she is causing is, at least in terms of online abuse and leading to legislation harm, long-term harm against the whole community, is much worse than what she's faced. In this issue specifically. Her own personal history with physical abuse is a separate issue there. So it's complicated. I don't have any answers. That's the point. But I'd like to hear your thoughts down in the comments below. Let me know what you think about this whole situation. Let me know what you think about JK Rowling. I'd really like to hear it down in the comments below. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel. I do more topics on JK Rowling, Harry Potter, Star Trek, geek topics, social and personal issues in geek culture, things like that. That's what this channel's here for. I also do a podcast. You can check those out. But regardless of whether you subscribe, listen to the podcast, comment, all that sort of stuff, I just hope that you, as always, live long and prosper. Thank you so much to all my patrons who support me over on Patreon. And an extra special thanks to my commander level and above patrons, Ashley Allen Bocello, Miranda Janelle, Eli Berg-Moss, Ashlyn Solstice, Christina Dalliance, Greg Gillum, Boyd and Mary Beth Earl, Wayne Twitchell, Ish the Mad, Buttoneer, Randy Thompson, Mouse Pounder, Jemshin, Susan Banks, Wellington Marcus, Lorena Mesa, Alexander Miller, John Steele, William Stewart, Michael Beam, Gavin Robinson, Aaron Brown, Christy Marie Johnson, Jason Knott, Maggie Evans, Maeve, Subraxis, Zach Cody, Dante St. James, Wen Dizzle Bizzle, Auntie Cat 808, Patrick Shannon, Din Hagney, Mark the Edge, Bree Beecher, Polly Mina, and Gretchen Badger. Thank you to all of you. I couldn't do this without you, so thank you so much for your support.